Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. This episode brought to you, like all episodes, by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today on Roll20.net. Follow us on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook at SWGM Podcast. Check out the YouTube channel. Share, like, subscribe. Check out the videos and of the podcast there from the live stream at the YouTube channel. Pardon me, 1 second. Almost nailed it. At the YouTube channel /youtube.com Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Subscribe on iTunes, Savage Worlds GM Podcast, and support us on Patreon, patreon.com /SWGM Podcast. Tonight's topic, who the boss? And no, we're not switching tact and changing the show to a horrible podcast about 80s TV. Tonight, we're talking about leadership roles at the table on both sides of the screen. And here to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hold me closer, Tony Danza.
Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
5 years of experience it takes to not be able to mute yourself so that you come in through your own headphones.
Oh, some call him Jib. Yeah, great pod.
He's got nothing.
Oh no!
And I do. We have to make an important announcement. One thing, real quick. If you're watching the live stream, feel free to chat in the live stream. We'll include that in the show tonight. We must start off. Tomorrow is one of the hosts' birthdays, so we're gonna start off with a. We were going to sing a song, but screw that. We're just going to go and everybody go to Chris Fox's Savage G plus community. Oh, shit. You know what? I'm going to call it. We're going to call this Game for Rain. No, go check out.
Time to start over.
Go check out Chris's Facebook page and his G plus profile page. I wish him a happy birthday. He's getting a senior discount at McDonald's on a cup of coffee and an Egg McMuffin starting tomorrow.
That's right. I might have to go for breakfast in the morning.
So tonight's topic, leadership. We want to talk about leadership. A couple things we also want to kind of include in this conversation as a general scope is we want to talk about not only do you need a player character leader in the group? Do you need it? Do you have to have it? Is that something that evolves organically at the table that people just tend to follow the strongest personality in your player group? Do you have a situation where how much narrative control can the GM reserve for himself in the leadership position and still manage to herd those cats at the table with allowing them to have some narrative control as well? So that's kind of the bounds of our topic tonight. And we'll start it off with Jib.
No.
Thoughts? No? Okay.
No, you don't need to specify a leader. Whoever is leading in the moment will solve itself organically. However, it raises the question, are we talking about the person who is leading the play? Are we talking about the person who is leading in the context of what's going on in the evolving story? Are we talking about the person who's deciding what kind of pizza we're getting?
Or are you talking about the mechanics monkey at the end of the table who's going to hear everyone rifle off what they want their character to do and go, hey, did you know if you use this maneuver, you get a bonus to what you just said you wanted your character to do? Or you've also got, and this is the one I think that stands out to me kind of the most, is that guy who's playing the in-character leader, but isn't the leader at the table.
Yeah, you see that. I think you see that. I see that a lot.
You know,
that person who they want to play the face and they want to be the leader, and they sit there for the entire session and say 3 or 4 words, and you're like, all right. So who wants to take on the task of going and talking to the Baron or whatever? And well, we'll let the leader do it. And he just looks at you like, no.
He's got the +4 charisma. He's got the stacked edges and doesn't want to say anything in roleplay.
Yeah, like I think you've chosen the wrong character type.
Well, I mean, is this an outmoded concept then? Of having a party leader? Is this like kind of go back to early fantasy dungeon delving
in the
role playing?
Back in the early days of role playing games, you had a specific role in the party. You had your leader, you had your caller, you had your mapper, and everybody had their job to do. We don't do that anymore.
We need to go back to the days where you have a mapper and force somebody to sit there and draw on graph paper.
I think at least half of our audience is following the idea.
Yeah, that was back. I wasn't even playing in those days. I know about them, but yeah, I wasn't playing back in those days. You know, I kind of think that the leader, I guess it kind of depends on. It can depend, I guess, on what type of game you're playing. Like, you know, right now, we're playing in a Star Wars game, and you know, we have the captain of the ship. So, you know, if you've got that, you've kind of got that player who's playing the captain is kind of got that built-in leader.
Okay, so let's explore that for a second. Let's talk about. Let's say we're gonna run like a military campaign, or we're gonna run something Star Trek-esque. Are all the characters bridge officers? Does that make the most sense? Let's just break it down to Star Trek. Let's say all the characters are bridge officers. Who's playing the captain? Should one of the player characters play the captain? Does that impinge on the other members in the group's player agency? Because at one point in time, that player can go, "That's an order."
It can.
The questions we've got from chat too, where they're asking, how do you handle military ranks, and what happens when player A, who is declared the captain, gives an order and player B doesn't listen to it? Is there, do you allow the game to have a punishment, or is there, a mutiny, a recurring theme that goes on in the game?
Well, it kind of depends on the nature of your game. I ran a Weird Wars Rome game a while back. And the conceit of Weird Wars Rome is that the player characters are members of a contubernium, which is an 8-man unit. And one of the characters was a tribune, who's an officer. And then one of the characters was functionally the platoon sergeant. And then a couple of them were just soldiers. And then one of them was an auxiliary, who's like, was a native add-on person. And in that particular game, it worked out because the guy who was playing the tribune was intentionally, by his own design, completely inept. So the way that worked out is one of the other characters would suggest something, would say they should do something, and he would repeat it as an order.
That could work.
And then the guy who was playing the sergeant would go, "That's a wonderful idea, Tribune. We'll get on that right away." And that's how they did it in that game. Right now, I'm running a Pirates game, and the captain is an NPC who you never see, and he never speaks. It's a conceit of the way they've set the game up. The captain never speaks. He just kind of indicates things, or they just do what he knows they want him to do, what they know he wants them to do.
Right. Well, even Star Trek. Okay, let's take a look at Star Trek. Star Trek Next Generation, for example, even breaks its own mold into like the second and third season, where the idea was supposed to be, no, the captain never leaves the ship because he's too high priced of a commodity and resource. He doesn't go on away missions. That's what the away team. Yeah, how long did that last? It's not workable at the table.
Well, let's be blunt, though. That lasted right up until the contract renewal came up for the actor, and he said, "I want more money and more screen time," which meant he got written into all the away missions.
Right. And even if you look at Star Trek, that's a very, very loose. Yeah, Captain Kirk's in charge, but he's not swaggering enforcing his will on Spock and McCoy. It's more leadership by committee in a story element thing. So I mean, you can kind of take that tact if you're trying to run a Star Trek game, but sooner or later, if you put a player character in the captain's seat as the captain, sooner or later that character is going to say, or that player is going to go, that's an order. This is what we're doing.
Chris, you just wrote through Hell and High Water. Were there any suggestions in the GM section that you guys put out, or anything that you from doing all the play testing you've had to do that really worked well for that setting, as far as like the captain versus the rest of the crew?
I think it's been more like any other setting that has the captain. We have the option in there. We have somebody can be the captain. We actually have an edge called Salt of the Sea, where they start with 20 XP, kind of like Veteran of the Weird West. So, we didn't really set up anything saying, hey, this person's the captain, how's this going to work? To be honest with you, I hadn't even really thought about that. I've been in enough games where somebody just kind of assumes that leadership role. But on the flip side, that's maybe something that we should have looked at, because I know when I was running 50 Fathoms, we didn't run it. I didn't run it for very long, but I mean, we had some issues where the NPC captain was taken out, killed, and there was the power vacuum, and then so now all the player characters were all trying to rush in and decide who was going to be the captain, and basically, the captain's hat's laying on the deck, and they're all running for the captain's hat, because basically whoever puts on the captain's hat, they decided was going to be the captain.
Right.
So we had agility rolls and all this stuff for who was going to get there and who was going to put the hat on first. So
another thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, that's it.
Another thing to keep in mind is that if you have a captain, most people are by human nature going to go, oh, we have to make a decision. Yes, Captain. What do you think?
I had that come up a lot
I see that a lot
in my Firefly game, where the captain of the ship suddenly had to be the leader of the party, and everyone's looking to the guy who owns the ship as if he's the most important person to make decisions, and the player wanted nothing to do with it.
Right.
Yeah, you could do this. You could install. With Savage Worlds rules the way they work, you could install a allied extra NPC captain, to where the actions of the captain are actually controlled by the players. They make the decisions, but the role play is controlled by the GM.
In the Expanse series of novels, they have a ship, they have a captain, they have a crew, but outside of tactical situations where seconds count, all decisions are voted on by the corporation, and they all own equal shares in the corporation.
All right.
So,
well, if you even look at Star Trek, for example, too, most of even in the Next Generation, that command style is not Picard walking into the ready room going, okay, here's exactly what we're going to do. It's
right.
All right, everybody. I trust my officers and their specialties. Here's the mission. What are your suggestions? I'll weigh everything. I think that's a good plan. We'll go with that. Not even in the TV series is Picard necessarily walking in and bossing everybody around. It's more like we were saying earlier. It's more like leadership by committee.
Yeah.
There's typically the one person who gets to have kind of the final say once the committee's all spoken, and that I think ends up being the player that should have taken the leadership edges and the leadership role within the narrative. It doesn't always happen, unfortunately, right. But you do always get that one person who stands kind of head and shoulders above the crowd. And rather than getting too lost in the weeds about what they did in different TV shows and movies, I think focusing on if you are the GM of a group of players, that group of players, and who's the strong personality who's going to talk over people, who's going to say, hey, you just said something great, but why don't you do X instead or along with it? You know who your players are. You also know who your wallflowers are, and you can kind of nudge them during session 0 character creation to say, you don't like to talk in character. Maybe you shouldn't play the face. Maybe you don't really want to take all those leadership edges if you're not going to be acting like a leader.
Right. Well, also, too, I think that in any group, especially if you're playing with a group for a long time, there is a very strong personality in that group that the group has anointed as the leader without so much as saying so. In our dead end group, everybody knows that player character is Dave. And in most of our games, that player character is Dave because he consistently makes character roleplay choices that are not self-centered for him, but for the story and for the group. He tends to have a very decisive approach when he says, "Here's what my character does or says." It's very decisive, and I think that in our little group that we're playing in, Dave is a good example of the person who has got a very strong personality at the table, the player that has a very strong personality table that just rises to the level of being the leader in that group, period. People tend to look to that person, look to him automatically. If you go, okay, what do you guys do? There'll be a pause while everybody waits for Dave to speak. And usually when Dave goes, I think we should do this, almost always the other players at my table kind of go along with it. So,
geez, Dave, give other people a chance.
It's fucking annoying, I'll be honest. I have told Jared before, like, I just want to play the character that rides along in the back. And we will build me the most wallflower, subservient helper style character and end up being just pushed to the forefront by the other players. Yep. I had a character in our vampire game that we did. We were all vampire hunters. My character was entirely built for going and doing research. You told me the plan, and I'll go look at a book how to accomplish it. I still ended up having to be even the combat leader of the group.
Yep. He built a total. Built a total Willow Sandberg character, and then the other player characters in that game forced him to be Buffy, just full on. Yeah. So I mean, I think a part of this as the GM is recognizing that's happening at your table, and then here comes my follow-up question to that: do you intentionally challenge that player character?
Define challenge for me, please. In this context.
Challenge it with difficult decisions. Challenge that leadership.
Yes,
with difficult decisions.
You absolutely do.
I mean, I challenge the group with difficult, like Sophie's Choice style decisions, and I challenge the group as a whole. I don't know that if I notice that someone has risen up as the leader, that I pick on that one character more because they're the leader. I tend to, in fact, try to shy away from that as much as I can, because in my mind, the main character of the story is the party. It's not a player in the party. And I don't want to put the spotlight on that one person just because they've taken a leadership role, because it tends to leave somebody out at some point.
Well, let me rephrase then. How do you challenge the party through the leader? In other words, instead of, I'm not talking about specifically creating something that's challenging for the player or the character that is the leader in your group, but putting out that horrible no-win scenario. Here's your option A and option B. Both are equally horrible. And then setting that down and then backing off and watching the party decide how to deal with that. Because here's the other thing too. I'm not necessarily sure that the leader is a leader 24/7 either.
I was going to say, yeah, there's
down into a democracy.
Yeah, there's times when that's going to happen. You're going to lay those two things out on the table, and you're going to get that group interaction and the group looking at it, and then you may lay those things out at the table, and suddenly that leader type person jumps on those and starts the conversation with what their ideas are, and then hopefully that will bring the rest of the group into the conversation. But yeah, I've kind of seen that go both ways.
Because I think you can have a democracy, kind of. You can't have the party that doesn't really have a defined de facto leader. But I would say even in that group dynamic, there's one mouthpiece for that party. They may end up having a conversation as players. What do you think we should do? I don't know. Or as characters, what do you think we should do? I don't know. But usually it's one person in that group presenting it when the group makes a final decision.
Right. Yeah.
And I would call that person the leader.
Yeah. And and they may not necessarily be the leader PC, but they may just be that person at the table who, takes that lead as the player themselves taking that kind of leadership role on.
So let me ask this question. Should the GM basically install a leader when you see him naturally coming into play?
You should let it evolve. It'll sort itself out.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, because again, we're going back to what we've already said. What happens if, I don't know the best way to put this, what happens if that was a fluke and that person doesn't want to be leader, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, you're now the leader. I guess you say instill a leader because they've taken that role at the table. Let me throw it back. So you do that, and then they're like, nope, I don't want to be the leader. Do you just move on at that point?
Well, I think there's a question of, when we start talking about leader in this regard, the GM setting a leader doesn't change anything. There's no mechanic in Savage Worlds that says this is the party leader and they get an extra Benny that they can give to any member of the party. There's no extra mechanics for a party leader. So if the narrative flows that, this week Dustin has arisen, everyone's taking his orders, and the captain of the pirate ship dies, it's entirely plausible for as the GM to have the bosun of the ship call for a vote and have all the votes tallied, and all of a sudden you've installed Dustin's character as the captain, regardless of whether or not he wants it, and play with a narrative around the idea that his characters become captain, but there's not a mechanic around that. You're not saying, well, when Dustin speaks, everyone has to listen. You're saying in character. When Dustin's character speaks, everyone's supposed to listen, and if you don't, we'll explore the story from there. So I think there's this idea of assigning like the player at the table to speak for everybody. No, you should never do that. Let the social dynamic do itself. But I'm not afraid of letting the story evolve in a manner where someone's character even undesirably becomes the leader and gets the wings pinned to their chest and has to make the decisions, and leads to that rich story moment where the leader seizes at the start of the next combat and goes, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was more along the lines of what I was asking. I just wasn't verbalizing or communicating it as such. Yeah, narratively creating situations where the GM through story installs a leader. Like, for example, the Firefly game that Dave's talking about, I said repeatedly, okay, well, let's play Firefly. I'm all good for it. I'll be a player. I don't want to be captain. Well, guess who's captain?
Just say no, Jared. Just say no.
I don't want to be captain. So a lot of that gameplay was about that character not wanting to be captain. Like, no, I own the ship. Yeah. No, it's my ship. Yeah, I understand. I don't want, no. I trust you. Whatever you think is good, it's good. And then the role play of that was, you're the captain. Tell us what to do. I ain't got a clue. I don't know. Why don't I don't know, fly the ship a certain, however you do it. So I mean, that could be an interesting story angle too to play, as well as the reluctant leader in your narrative as well. It could be an interesting story element. You could always have a thing where the players, and well, let me put it this way: what if you do a thing where if you're having a struggle with that and you kind of need to have a captain in your game? Is it okay for the GM to float the narrative idea of the Dread Pirate Roberts model of, well, there is no actual captain, you're actually all captain, but there's this invisible captain no one ever sees, or they all dress in black and you guys just take turns pretending to be the captain?
I mean, that could work.
Or is that too heavy? Is that too heavy-handed?
There's an aspect of that feels heavy-handed to me. I am not above sitting in the GM's chair and, suggesting the kernel of an idea to the party to see what direction they run with it. Right. But I try to keep it very, very basic. Well, you guys could assault the front door, or you could try to bypass the security somehow, or maybe you talk your way in. I'll give little ideas like that rather than saying, well, you could steal uniforms to go in through the back door, or you could show up at the front door with a giant, cannon that blows open everything. I try to avoid giving too much of an idea to them. With that said, if there's NPCs around as a GM, you always have that option to have an NPC float an idea into the narrative of the role play and see what your players do with it. But I think it's something you have to be careful with, because you run very close to solving the very challenges you're putting on the table and telling them this is the right way because it came from your mouth.
That's exactly what I was thinking. That you have to be real careful, because that NPC, they're gonna inevitably think that you just gave them the correct, if you want to use that word, answer.
Yeah.
And they're gonna stop thinking for themselves, and they're gonna go, well, that NPC said that, so that's got to be what the GM wants or expects us to do. So we should go ahead and do that.
Or we should do the opposite, because if the GM is making a suggestion, it means the death of us all, right?
That's very true. If you're a dick GM,
right?
I don't know anyone. I don't know any GMs who would ever do something like that.
Well,
that sounds like a dirty trick.
So, backing away from the topic to just our main topic, who's the boss? I think there is an aspect of this that doesn't get talked about enough in regards to the hobby, because it gets overshadowed by it's the GM's game, the GM has final say, but the GM's not the boss of the table. We have these other social dynamics to go on. Jim was talking earlier about, well, the boss might be the guy who owns the house who decides what we have on the pizza tonight, because he's a hosting and he gets to be the boss tonight. But you also might have things like, yes, the GM has final say during play on the adjudication of a rule, but the boss is, the guy who's the mechanics monkey, who during session 0 lays out all the homebrew rules you're going to use for this particular game or something. The boss can be a very interesting dynamic within your gaming group that doesn't always fall back to the GM is the boss of the game. And I think that gets overshadowed and not talked about, because we so hammer on the idea it's the GM's game, it's the GM's say at the end of the day, because that's the big thing we all see come up, is that guy that wants to argue a rule mid-session rather than the guy who says, hey, we're going to do a Secret Santa because Christmas is in a couple of weeks. So everybody throw your name in the hat and we'll draw names later. And that's the guy that's the boss of the gaming group because he hosts it every week or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you hit on a good point, is the nature of our hobby is collaborative, therefore democratic. So I think it becomes a difficult situation, like Alec was saying earlier, like, well, who gets to play captain without it turning into finally someone giving an order and it becoming a mutiny? Because it's hard to kind of have that style of play if the story kind of calls for it at a table where you're supposed to be everybody collaboratively involved in telling the story, and that's a very democratic process. to try to then force into a story narrative of no, there's one guy in charge, and we do what he says. So I think it's kind of why we're having that conversation tonight as well. Is like, how do you deal with that?
Well, in that regard, I would throw it to Jib and go, so Jib, in your Weird Wars Rome group, how did the players decide who was going to be the Tribune?
One of the players decided he wanted to play a Tribune.
He just spoke up during like session 0 and said, I'm playing the Tribune?
He said, yeah, I'd like to, the idea I have is I'd like to make a Tribune who's the child of a senator. And the only reason he's here is because his daddy's a senator and he's totally incompetent.
Oh, so he actually pitched it to the group as part of the character. He didn't say, I'm playing a Tribune and then pitch the character later. It was one solid pitch of, I'm the leader, but I'm a bad leader.
Yeah. Yep.
And I mean, that's something that, again, goes back to that session 0. All the players kind of decide before the game starts that, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Jib's character is going to be the Tribune and be completely incompetent, and Jared's character is going to be the power behind the throne sergeant walking around barking orders at everybody to get in line.
Well, how does because I know you've done a lot of stuff with Pirates of the Spanish Main, Dave. How does Pirates of the Spanish Main handle captaincy? Does it deal with it specifically as a game mechanic, or just give advice for it?
Oh, see, you're gonna make me beat on my child. It is one place where I think Wiggy was a little stuck in old school gaming. There are specific edges you take to be the captain and own the ship and be able to give commands that let people do things. So you have to spend character creation points to be the captain. So it plays horribly, because not only do you get the one person who has to declare themselves captain during kind of session 0 build-up point, but that person ends up with fewer character points to spend to make a competent character, because they had to buy all the shit that goes into owning the boat and having the title and all of that. So it's a badly handled mess where they get mechanics involved. With that said, the way it's written, you could remove all of the captain-specific rules, and it would play just fine. So as bad as those rules can be in play, in practice, when the rubber meets the road, they're not mandatory by any stretch of the imagination. And again, they just suffer from people have kind of moved on to the point where I don't feel the need to make my players pay points to have a ship.
And a pirate.
The group should just get to start with the ship in a pirate game.
Right.
That's what I did.
I'm trying to remember what book it was that said it first, but there was a gaming book out there that basically said, if your characters are, smugglers in a Star Wars setting, they get a YT transport. If they're pirates, they get a pirate ship. If they're tankers in World War II, they get a tank. If the conceit of the game is X, provide what is necessary for it. Don't make the players then spend starting resources to buy their damn uniform or
their weapon
government issued to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so with the Pirates of the Spanish Main, sorry. So what if no player character wants to use the captain rules? Then does it give you advice for playing without a player character captain?
Not really. And
No.
Again, it plays just fine if you as a GM can kind of work your way through that. And, again, you're looking at a book that's more than 11 years old. So
Right.
As a GM, more than likely, if you're running Pirates of the Spanish Main today, you've GM'd something else and you've stumbled across Pirates or you've played it before. So you can make that adjustment on the fly. It doesn't really, handhold you through, make sure they start with a pirate ship or anything like that.
So the player characters, any player character in that game, for example, if you were running it, could choose to be captain.
Correct. Now, I will say this: the actual adventure that's in the back of the book is written from the perspective that there is no captain, that they are a crew of pirates without a ship and without a crew. who basically go out and rent a crew for the first one. They buy passage on a ship that happens to be a ship that's amenable to doing piracy, acts of piracy. And it walks you through a storyline where they can, at the end of that, have enough money to possibly move on to something greater. So, I mean, there is an adventure jumping off point that starts with the idea, and then that adventure is written. If someone took the captain role, here's how you modify this for their own ship, rather than if no one took the captain role, here's what you should do.
So do you think do you think if none of your player characters want to play the captain and you need to have a captain for the game, let's say you just decide and everybody's in agreement you need to have a captain, then is it right to have an NPC captain where that character is controlled by the GM, or is that a conflict of interest?
The Pirates of the Spanish Main answer to this is not only is it right to have an NPC player, an NPC captain, but there's a rate in the book that the players have to pay to hire a captain to be. What does it cost to have a pirate captain on the ship that's not a player character? That's actually in the book, hard written in. This is the cost per, so many shares of the booty, so many, gold florins per week, etc. So, I mean,
yeah, I think I like your way, Jared, that you had mentioned earlier, where the captain is just silent, and just go with that and let the players play their characters. And, if they really need a captain for something, then, you can do it as an NPC, but maybe they have a first mate, and the first mate goes out and talks to people and does the, I don't want to say captainy stuff because then he'd be the captain, but you know what I mean? That if you don't want to have somebody to play the captain, then I don't see a problem with having an NPC captain. I would not let that NPC captain become necessarily a GM PC where he's making decisions that you are expecting the rest of the players to have to follow, and that you're too involved in the game.
That's kind of my question, though. Is that too tempting for most GMs? I mean, does it become an issue? Is it a trust thing? I mean, because you could tell the players in session 0, okay, listen, there's going to be an NPC captain. I'm going to be in control of that captain. However, the captain's style is very laid back. He kind of goes with what his bridge crew and officers recommend, and typically says yes to almost everything. But understand that if there's ever a point in the game where the captain starts giving orders, I'm not doing it to screw you guys. I'm doing it for the story. So, for example, there would be things, and I hate to keep going back to Star Trek, but it's an apropos analogy to describe. There would be points where Picard would walk out and go, set course for, here's the coordinates. Do you have the coordinates? Good. Set course. And then Riker, what's going on? You can't talk about it. I'm under direct orders from Starfleet Command. This comes from the highest levels. Well, I can't talk to you about it. You just have to trust me.
Well, and I don't want to step on Jim because it looked like he had a comment, but I do want to throw something at him in regard to this.
Duck Jib.
Have him give his comment as well as an answer, because I know Jib has run an actual Weird Wars campaign. I know at least the experience I've had reading through like the plot points and the way the GM section is written for the Weird Wars stuff. They are essentially a unit of the military being sent places to do things. So you could have very easily slot in, the captain is a NPC who's reading out the orders from the scroll, or, got the radio communique, and the players are the sergeants and the NCOs that have to make that happen. But I'm wondering, in play, is that the way it actually works out, or am I just misinterpreting the way the book is written?
Yeah, no, that you're reading the book exactly right. There are ways to make it so that you don't take away player agency by having a captain or having a commanding officer. But it is a potential, disaster that can happen. If the GM decides, well, I have my story, and I'm going to use the captain to push them down my storyline. That's a mistake on several levels.
So we're talking about an NPC concept where the GM goes, all right, gather around. I've just gotten information from command and plot exposition. Any questions? Good. Get out there, men. That kind of, we're talking about a patent character, right? I'm basically
Exactly.
wondering why I've all called you here today. Blah, blah, blah. Lay out the goal, the mission, and then step off.
So I think where this crosses the line for me is less the railroad aspect of it. The GM is ramming their story down the players' throats by having the captain deliver orders. If you're playing a military campaign, you're kind of expecting there's going to be orders that come down from on high, and the player agency is in how they achieve those orders, not necessarily in what they do from week to week. Where I think for me this crosses a line, though, into an absolute GM faux pas is where that officer character, that whether it's a lieutenant, a captain, whatever, who is the CO of the unit, suddenly becomes a Mary Sue NPC that's got the best shooting and the best fighting and the best throwing and outperforms the player characters on the battlefield because they're a lead from the front kind of officer. I think that's where you're getting into the realm of a true GM faux pas, whereas if a railroad is what you're going to play, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I personally think it's a mistake. I personally prefer a more open-ended kind of a thing. But, I mean, if that's what you and your players want to play, it's not wrong. It's wrong when your character outperforms all the player characters because you're the GM and you can pencil whip the game.
Yeah, that's where it becomes a GM NPC.
Yeah, right. Well, I would agree. There's a certain, I think if you're all agreeing to play a military campaign, there's a certain amount of buy-in for there to be railroady missions. A little bit of a railroad style to the game. It's just part of the allure of the game. It's part of the fabric
especially
of
military games. Yeah, especially a military game. Yeah, if you're not going to buy into that conceit, don't play something different.
Yeah, in the Weird Wars Rome game, we had multiple circumstances where the Tribune got called into the tent, the command tent where the Centurion is waiting, and the Centurion says, "Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to go over there. You're going to go to this place. You're going to do the thing because we're getting reports of this, that, and that. Go do the thing." And it wasn't really like they could say, "No, I don't want to do that." They were going to do that.
Right.
And I'll say this too, for when we're talking Weird Wars, I think Weird Wars Rome is the easiest to get away with a more open-ended game than, say, Weird Wars 2, or even like the Tour of Darkness, Weird Wars Vietnam era stuff, because as soon as you have the ability for the front line to be in contact with command through a radio, it is a lot harder at that point to explain away why they didn't call this back into headquarters to get a new, here's the sit rep and ask for new orders on a case-by-case basis. You've exceeded your rules of engagement, call back to headquarters and get new orders, is something that I think if you're trying to achieve that verisimilitude of a military operation, players are going to kind of lean on more than in a Weird Wars Rome where calling back to headquarters is, okay, somebody write a letter, hand it to a guy on a horse, and ride his happy ass to Italy.
Or at least back to command.
Yeah, wherever the front line is at the very least, but all the way back to Rome in some cases.
I don't mind. I kind of like the Lancelot method. Message what you said.
Now, with that said, I do want to, before Jared moves on to the next major actual comment, I do want to touch on something Far Sniper 10,000 asked. He said he needs to play the Spanish main campaign. I'm sorry to tell you, there isn't one.
There isn't one. They didn't put one in there.
The business deal between the guys who held the rights for the Spanish main card game and PEG fell apart because of I believe the card game company went out of business for a little while and then sold off their assets. And all the books planned as far as like plot point campaign books and what all fell through. It's a heartbreak, but hey, you know, there's a great plot point campaign out there for 50 Fathoms. And I hear there's this new one that kind of is maybe a spiritual successor to both of the previous pirate ones and has a fresh look on things. It's got a great plot point campaign. Maybe check out that one.
Yeah, I've heard tell of that by some guy named Chris and another guy named Chris.
And a guy named Brett.
Yeah. I think it's called Buccaneer something, Hell and High Water. It's a, you know, I don't know. It's just rumors, but
won't have a plot point. But we have 12 one-shots written by a bunch of different authors who you could certainly tie together and make them into a plot point.
Let me fix that statement for you, Chris. Won't have a plot point yet.
Right. Correct.
Yet.
Correct.
In development.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to read a comment from Sunset Sam, one of our patrons. Do you as GMs sometimes use the most active player leader to get the group moving back on track? This is kind of what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Do you challenge the leader? Do you...
I think sometimes that leader character will do that on their own, because that leader character sometimes, if you've got, you know, listening to the last Happy Jacks talking about how they would debate for 20 minutes on something and then come to a decision and then debate 20 more minutes on the decision they just came to. At some point, sometimes that leader character is going to just come in and say, all right, let's just do this and let's move on. And maybe that's because it's that stronger, more active player. You know, they may just take that upon themselves, but I could see doing that. And I can't give any specific examples of when I've done it, but I'm sure I have. I'm sure I've kind of taken that person who's kind of, because you can kind of tell that person too is ready to move on. And if you kind of goad that person who's ready to move on to get the rest of the group moving, then that'll help things out in the long run, I think, if that makes any sense to that question.
I think one thing I'd like to tackle is, how do you go about doing that? How would you as a GM go about doing that? I know how I would do that. I would do it through role play with an NPC, recognizing that player/player character as the leader and speaking to that player character as if they were the leader of the group, making all the decisions, and see how that plays out in gameplay.
So I actually have two answers to this question. One is the games where I'm the GM and Jared is playing, and the other is games I am GMing where Jared is not playing. In games where I'm GMing where Jared is actually a player at the table, this never occurs. There is no dead time, because if more than about 7.5 seconds passes where no one jumps up to answer the "what are we doing" question, Jared will take a wild left turn and just sprint. And he is the most god-awful monkey wrench thrower in this regard. The players never get a chance to have that developing conversation about what they're going to do next, because Jared gets bored about halfway through that conversation and takes immediate action.
Well, now I'm willing to go along with whatever the party comes up with that they want to do, but yes, Dave's right. When there's an extended period of indecision at the table where the player characters are not making a decision, yeah, then I do wild card. I'll go throw some monkey wrench. We could be hiding from the enemy, discussing our next step, and if nobody has any suggestions, this character will just jump up and go, I say we duke it out. Stand up, and now he stands up from cover and goes, come get me, you son of bitches, and do this and walk out into the thing and force the next thing to happen. But
the other answer, though, in the games where I don't have Jared there, I tend to try not to rely on the player leader, because it's all well and good that the party has formed its own social interaction and has that person that's going to be the leader. But I find when I have allowed myself to lean on that, instead of saying, what do you guys do? I turn to the leader and say, so what do you guys do? And it's a completely different social dynamic at the table when a GM asks the table what they do and when the GM asks a person what the people at the table are going to do. And I found I didn't like the impact that was having on my game, so it's something I pulled back from doing. It was one of those early mistakes of my GMing career.
Any thoughts, Jim? About how you go about it if you're going to involve the most active player, de facto leader or non-de facto leader? Do you engage them in a certain way, or
do you use them as a lever to get things moving?
I just no. If I want to get things moving, I'm just gonna smack the lot of them somehow.
Yeah, and there's an aspect of that I think is something that I do a lot, and I think you do as well, Jib, and that's if the gameplay has reached a dull moment, as the GM, it's my job to reinvigorate us and get us doing something else, whether it's time for an interlude or it's time for a beer bottle to slam into the side of somebody's head and a bar fight breaks out, or
a bear attacks.
Or
a man walks in with a gun.
Table, a discussion of a murder is going to happen the next night.
I was going to say the same thing, Jib. That was the same example I was going to give.
Or something. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's if they're not going to do something, you do something. And if you have passive players, you may be doing that a lot.
Yep.
But no, I don't specifically go after the leader to try to initiate play. Now, I will specifically go after characters if the thing that I want to see happen is relevant to them in particular.
Like, for example?
Like last night, one of the characters, if you've watched any of the Spaniard's Ghost sessions, one of the characters has a propensity for romantic encounters with, members of the opposite sex. One of the others has propensity for romantic encounters with members of the same sex, but that's, whatever. But anyway, they're in the middle of a fight, and the captain of the other ship swashbuckles and swings across to their ship because he's after one of the other characters, and she decides she's going to distract him by seducing him. Okay. Thing, and fails. But round goes by, and he does the exact same thing back to her. Grabs her and swings back across to his own ship with her. Because she'd been being kind of like, I'm a pacifist. I don't like fighting. I'm not going to, all right, I'll bring this one to you.
All right. It's fair. I think, too, that you could always use one of the things in the core rules Game Master section, the famous Hensley 5. You draw a card, you describe what's happening, and it's time for a player character's action in initiative order. You look at him and go, what do you do? And if they don't immediately answer, you start a countdown from 5 to 1 and go, you're on hold. Next.
I've said that the very first time I ever played in a game with Shane, he was running a Deadlands game, and he did that to me, and I froze the very first time he did it to me. He moved on, and from that point on, he started, and I was pretty sure I knew what I was going to be doing because I was paying attention to the game, and I was ready, and watching for things to change and the battlefield to change, but it threw me. I was like, oh, shit. What do I do?
It could seem like a little bit of a dick move, right? It could be like, oh my God, why is the GM being such a dick? But if the mantra of the game is fast, furious, fun, sitting there and letting players, give me a second. Let me reflect on my options. Right. Is it fast, furious, fun? Especially if you're trying to get a combat taken care of.
Right.
Well, I will say this. I love the difference between the way that's presented in the GM section of the book and the stories from the cons the fans tell about Shane slapping the table during the countdown and the almost intimidation factor of it being put on you and then moving right along, because it really is one of those things you do at the table that that asserts your position as the boss of the table. That this is the pace we are moving at tonight. If you can't keep up, get the fuck out. We're moving on.
Right. Lead, follow, or get the fuck out of the way. Yep. So let's talk about that. Then GM boss tricks. How do you run your game like a boss? I'm a fan of the, hey, if too much time passes.
Yeah. No, I
happen.
will. Oh yeah. If too much time passes, shit's going to happen. And now that said, different sessions of the same game are going to have a different pacing to them and a different energy to them. That's okay. But, you know, it's never wrong to hit them with something.
Right. Well, and it doesn't have to be combat either.
Right. No.
In fact, I would say combat should probably be the least often used, simply because of how swingy combat is in Savage Worlds. This isn't D&D where I can just hit you with a wandering monster, you know, the wandering damage roll that comes from out of the woods, and have it tick away a few hit points and move on. A wandering damage in Savage Worlds can also turn into a wandering incapacitation in Savage Worlds.
Right. Well, I mean, it's something simple as this. The characters are trying to be stealthy, and they're sitting there at the table planning a shadow run, epic campaign down to the tiniest detail. And after 10 minutes, I would allow a little bit of that. But after a certain time, I'm going to go, oh, you look up, and across the street, there's somebody videotaping you guys with a cell phone. And it's captured everything you've been discussing. And when you look at him, he panics and runs off. Now, oh, you waited too long. It took too long to make you were indecisive. Now there's a new wrinkle in your plan. Is the guy going to go tell the cops? Is he going to post it online? Is nothing going to happen? Do you chase him down and try to get the phone? What do you do? And you can, like we're saying, it doesn't have to be a guy walks in with a gun.
Right. It's just something happens.
Right.
And do something that's going to matter to them. That's going to be personal and is going to matter to them. You know, so if you have a character who has a habit of doing, you know, romantic liaisons along the way,
turn the table.
bring that back up. Mm-hmm. Do something from that. You know, if he's got a girl in every port, maybe one of them shows up pregnant. I don't know.
Or even what is his worst nightmare? Oh crap. One of the girls from his other port is visiting another girl in another port, and now both of them are there at the same time.
Right.
The girl he drugged once before is now stalking him and shows up in the middle, right in the middle of that.
And you don't have to make it combat. I think it would be much more fun to make her, you know, for example, in their culture, if you know he said certain things during their romantic encounter, and now by law he's married.
Yeah, all of a sudden she shows up on the ship and she's his wife.
Yeah,
right. It's like whoa! There was a ceremony. Oh, but you said I love you. You said I love you, and that's a proposal of marriage. We're bonded. What? No, whoa, wait, huh? No, what?
Pillow talk, baby. That's just pillow talk. So,
you know, or you know,
or her father shows up, and demands you marry her and make an honest woman out of her.
Right, her father and her 6, you know, really big brothers.
Right.
You know, or you know, the town that they were in some time ago is now having a problem, and they need them to come back and help, you know, do something about it, or something, whatever.
Interestingly enough, one of the things I will do as the or something in this case is the random cutaway to something that happens elsewhere. Maybe it includes a player, maybe it doesn't, but it's that whole, now we cut away and we see what the villain's doing from the TV show idea of, and, oh, look, you guys are busy doing this? Hey, by the way, Chris, that girl you had your character sleep with last night, turns out that she's the paramour of the local cartel leader, and he has you out in front of his house in a bullfight ring in a pile of tires, and you're inside of it. What do you do? Well, everybody else has been over here planning the heist. I've now taken Chris's character, played on something he had maybe, announced he was trying to hit the bar last night with his character. And then, oh, by the way, you're not part of this conversation. You're over here doing this other thing. You can do these cutaway moments that reinvigorate the gameplay and still allow the players to have that in-character role-play ability to talk and plan and everything.
Right. But would you be careful with that? Because what if you pull that player and say you're not part of this, and that player's like, yeah, but I want to be part of the planning.
Oh, you have to watch, and I always pick on the player who I can see the player has checked out.
Gotcha.
That player is bored with what's going on at the table because everyone's planning this and they have no interest in that. That's my Dingleberry who gets stuffed in the tires and set in the bullfight ring.
Gotcha. Yeah, and if that's the case, then yeah, I can see that working.
Again, tailor it to something that player has had that character do in the narrative. You can't just randomly stuff them into a problem. Suddenly we cut away to, Jib's character crawling through the ductwork. Why is my character in the ductwork?
You tell me.
It can't
you
be
tell
that
me
random.
Why is your character in the ductwork?
And are there clouds outside?
But Nathalia Lorde asked in chat, or kind of commented, that they need to enforce a solid pace like that more often. My group gets off topic so much OOC chatter, even from me. It's fun but bad for games. And I think this also comes back to that whole the boss of the table moment for the GM. If you have players who are, holding side conversations that are distracting from the game, it's entirely okay as a GM to sit there quietly and stare at them and let it hang for a good 10 seconds after the conversation ends and go, oh, I'm sorry, were you finished? Okay, so we'll go on. And that sends that clear message that what they did interrupted the game. I find players don't need to be told. They can be shown, and they care as much for this game as you do, and will stop that shit. Also, right. Benny Batum. That Pavlov's dog trick. You throw that Benny at somebody for great role play, and the guy who was off telling the Monty Python joke at the other side of the table pays attention because he wants bennies.
Right. So as the GM, there are certain responsibilities we have. One of those is actually governing the table.
Yep.
That is one of our responsibilities. And so the onus is on us to bring a certain seriousness and a certain focus to what we're doing. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have fun. You're supposed to be having fun. It doesn't mean that you have to be, hyper, laser focused every second of the game. But you do have to be aware enough to bring it back.
I agree. I would add on to that too. You are responsible for the tone at the table. Remember, you're not one of the players, even though you're friends with the players. You're not a player in that game. You're responsible for running that game. And like Dave said, if you have the tone where you're joking along with them, you can hardly get aggravated or angry or frustrated that they're not taking the game seriously if you're also cutting in with Monty Python jokes.
If you're yucking it up.
Because you're setting the tone. And I would say, too, that if you're playing a session where the tone of the story should be very tense, you should talk in monosyllabic tones. You should use very curt, clipped words and expressions when you're talking. You should do anything you can to reinforce that tone physically at your table for what's going on in the game as well. So that would be my like a boss tip for if you're running something. So, if you're typically laid back and you're just sit on the edge of your chair, stand up if you need to. Say, instead of the long, florid, flowing, poetic descriptions of what a place looks like, cut it down. Trim all the fat down to bare bones. You walk into a dark warehouse and then emphasize certain words that are gritty. You walk into a dark warehouse. The air is crisp and cold. There's no light to be seen anywhere except through the cracks of the window where moonlight, very dim moonlight's coming in. What do you do? And then, because you're reinforcing that tone with the way you're speaking, right, the way you're running that as well.
Body language. Do something physically different at the table when you're presenting it. If it's if it's that tense scene, lean forward. If it's a casual conversation, maybe kick way on back here and slow your pace and talk down. You can do a lot physically with your aura at the table by how big you make yourself or how small you make yourself that can change the feel of that very much, and it'll draw the player's attention back to what's going on the table because something's different. It doesn't require bombastic, it's different, and that draws attention.
Right. And like Dave just did something I'm not sure he's even aware of. Making a sound effect with your hands, like out of nowhere there's a crash. Everybody give me a fear check.
So I'm going to tell a story. I'm playing a character in our Friday night game.
Oh, drink.
Well, Jim didn't say it.
Oh, anyway. That's true.
It counts for everybody. So if you're playing the at-home bingo game, have a drink.
But the character has straight arrow as a hindrance. He can't tell a lie. He's horrible at lying. And he's one of these characters that's got some social inadequacies. So he's not a very good orator. So I knew I wanted the character. It was this big campfire scene. I knew I wanted to tell a ghost story. And I told it in the most horrible, with ums and stutters. And I don't think anyone picked up on the fact that wasn't just me describing a ghost story. That was me in character poorly telling a ghost story. And then I announced to Jared that I'm going to make a dice roll now and then I clap my hands, release a branch, and it slams into the back of their chairs. It startles them. And like multiple aces on the stealth roll, so they didn't see it coming the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. Well, and even like later on, there's a character who's got dysentery, walks into the forest late at night to take care of business. And then I just go, give me a notice roll. And critical fail. Like the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you feel a hot breath. When you turn around, you're face to face with a growling bear. That right there is all you need to say. It sets the tone. It paints that picture very, very vividly and quickly. And then you go, now give me a fear check. Yeah.
There's a wild bear crap in the woods, son.
And it wasn't a dick move. I'm going to put this. It wasn't a dick move. It wasn't a sudden random bear. I have foreshadowed that the party was possibly being followed by a bear earlier.
3 or 4 times.
Yeah. It wasn't out of nowhere. Oh, God damn, Jared, why are you being a dick GM and putting a grizzly bear in the forest? All right. So unless we have any more in the chat, I think we've pretty much addressed.
We've killed it. It's glue.
The leadership issue.
We talk these dingleberries all we can.
All right. So until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris, Dave, and Jib saying keep rolling and stay savage.